Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the webinar today, focused on the relationship between business and digital transformation. My name is Keith Lust, and today I will be presenting with Dan Morris and exploring this topic with you guys. And then we'll make some time at the end of the webinar to drop into some Q&A and discussion around your relative experiences, thoughts that you might like to share with one another about business and digital transformation. Again, welcome. Dan and I work for a firm called My Career Transformation that focuses on creating training programs for what we like to call agents of change. So people who are in the space of doing business transformation, digital transformation, process redesign, business architecture, experience architecture, all those individuals who think about and implement change in their organization to make our organizations more competitive, more effective, and deliver a real differentiated experience to our customers. Today's agenda, we're going to cover how do we start thinking about and justifying digital transformation, exploring how neither business nor digital transformation stands alone, discussing flexibility and rapid response in both business and IT. We'll introduce a term that we like to think about called continuous transformation, which implies that transformation is not a once and done activity, but actually needs to continuously occur to maintain your competitive advantage. And then, of course, as I mentioned, discussion for us as a group. Throughout the webinar, we're also having these little post-its you'll see over on the left side of the screen, something called AHA. So these are topics that we thought were useful to call out and really provide kind of an opportunity to step back and say, does this topic really have meaning and value to me and my organization? So with that, why don't we jump right into it? Again, My Career Transformation is focused on those who are in the business of and implementing change. We really come at it in a little bit different way. We provide more updated frameworks and tools, very practically oriented with regards to how do we successfully drive change into our organizations so that you as a leader in the organization become known for not only driving, but also succeeding in whatever the transformation that you're participating or leading. Dan and I have been doing this for a long time. We're unique in that we've both been consultants for a variety of firms like TCS and Capco and E&Y and Oracle and others, but we've also held leadership positions in organizations. So that means we've been held accountable for P&Ls and budgets, for leading people, for actually being around after the consultants left to ensure that whatever we put in place sticks and is in fact working. And so the fact that we've walked in your shoes as professionals from both sides of the equation gives us a kind of a unique perspective that we integrate and would like to share with you this afternoon. For the purposes of today's discussion, we thought we'd begin with really kind of establishing some foundations. And I'm also, just as an aside, hopefully everybody has gotten these slides in your email that was sent out by one of our colleagues so that you have something you can track along, make some notes, and you've also got a takeaway piece as well. So we start off with some just classic definitions to ground ourselves. First, obviously, a strategy, which we're all familiar with, which is a clear and aligned definition of the organization's visions and goals, and more specifically, the investments needed to be able to compete, differentiate. The strategy provides a clear roadmap to the future and defines what needs to be occurring and when, and also thinks both from a business and a digital perspective with regards to the timing of legacy applications, legacy processes, and how we're going to be evolving the business. Then we think about business transformation versus digital transformation. And I use the word versus very deliberately because oftentimes organizations will be doing one or the other or calling what they're undertaking one versus the other. And we like to think that business transformation is a fundamental rethinking of the capabilities and the the operating model that an organization runs under. It's not about improving, which is typically what we think about in continuous improvement or even BPR. We're not improving the organization. We're fundamentally rethinking and making a leap forward to define a new organization, to position it to compete more effectively and more differentially. Digital transformation is about leveraging technologies so that we can enable the strategy. And then there's another important part around digital transformation, which is it also informs my strategy. So an example that we like to use is if we think about some emerging new digital technologies, think about holographics or 3D printing and other things of that nature. If leadership understands what new capabilities are out there, we can in fact rethink our business strategy to make it even more edgier. So if we have holographic experiences, for example, our strategy now can create an even more intimate and more differentiated customer experience than if leadership was unaware that that digital capability existed. That can be leveraged as part of a digital transformation agenda. So again, business transformation is really rethinking the organization, and the digital is then saying, how do we enable that strategic agenda for the organization? There's some unfortunate stats that continue to remain out there. The Standish Group estimates that over 80% of IT products don't completely achieve their desired outcomes. The same goes for a BCG study about digital transformations, where only about 30% of those actually achieve or exceed their target expectations or objectives. We've all seen these same statistics over the years with regards to projects that just don't deliver what is expected in terms of the outcomes, let alone the time, cost, and materials that it takes to get that done. PMI also supports this and has a lot of interesting data around this, everything from making sure we have the right people, managing the allocation and prioritization of scarce internal resources, promoting an effective and efficient communication so that people are all understand, align, and agree around how we're moving forward. Some thoughts from our experience. We just came up with our top 10 things that need to be done and still need to be done differently, is making sure that you have the backing and continued commitment and support from senior leadership, making sure that your project estimation and budgets are as tight as possible, making sure you've got good planning and scenarios built with regards to how you're going to deliver, ensuring that you've got the right technology mix that recognizes that we continue to live in a very much of a legacy environment and really need to take advantage of what modern capabilities exist. And again, these are things that we all have seen: failure to manage scope, underestimating complexity, and so forth. So these are things that we've learned. So the question becomes, how do we address transformation? How do we address both digital and business transformation to make it more effective? I'm going to step back here for a moment and think more specifically about digital transformation. It's all about, as I said before, enabling the business and ensuring that the business has the business and the technology or digital capabilities necessary to achieve and execute the business agenda. It's not about implementing new things like a new BPMS suite or RPA or AI or machine learning. It's not something like going paperless or some interesting kind of agenda or objective from an IT perspective. It's all about thinking about the strategic direction of the organization and at the IT level to ensure that that happens, as well as both understanding and leveraging how do we address both legacy and the future technology so that we have a controlled roadmap to replace the existing technology suite. We thought we'd kind of give some real pointed examples of what we mean by business versus digital transformation. So again, as I said, business transformation is rethinking the revenue and the business model at a fundamental level. It's determining what capabilities are required to deliver that strategy, the business and the revenue model, so that I can deliver differentially in the market. It's about establishing a different and new operating model. It's all about restructuring the organization, rethinking partnerships, alliances, relationships with vendors, and defining new ways to leverage resources. That means your people, your partners, and so forth. Digital transformation focuses on how do we reshape or shape the organization strategy to leverage those digital experience. It's all about ensuring that the customer and the employee experience are differentiated and consistently delivered. We tend to think about digital transformation as automation of the existing business processes to improve them, both from a cost, quality, and time perspective. And then, of course, implementing adaptive and resilience across your technology landscape so that as disruption occurs, you're able to better address it. Now, this is the unfortunate part. The conversation too often is, well, we're doing business transformation versus digital transformation. So we think about business transformation, again, is around rethinking our revenue models, creating new operating models. And the digital transformation tends to be thinking about radical automation of existing processes and doing improvements, again, from a cost, quality, and timing perspective. And therein lies this tension then. If I'm trying to make things more effective in the existing business processes, while I've got others who are rethinking the entire business model, I've got a tension between the two. From a business transformation perspective, we're redefining the customer and the employee experience to really deliver consistent differentiation. Whereas digital tends to say, all right, how do we apply new digital technologies and solutions to improve our current existing experiences? And then finally, as I said, rethinking partnerships, leveraging resources in new ways. Technologists, the digital side tends to think about, well, how do I harden the existing footprint? And this tension that unfortunately creates a kind of a pull model where we've got different point of views, which results in different agendas, different priorities, and creates that creative tension between business and digital transformation. Whereas what we really need to do is determine how do we start to pull in the same direction? How do I align and create a more truly integrated approach to what business transformation, digital transformation, or maybe better said, how do I create a better approach to continually transform my organization so that I am always ahead of the competition? So that kind of sets up the groundworks. What gets interesting then is now, so what? What do I do differently? And how do I start creating more of an integrated approach to business and digital transformation? So Dan, why don't I turn it over to you, and you can speak to the more practical aspects of what do we need to start to do differently to achieve a different approach to continuous transformation?
Well, thank you, Keith. One second here. I think we have a little technical issue here, Keith. Are you still showing on your slides?
Yes. Does Trevor, are you able to see slide number 12?
Yes.
Okay. So slide number 12, and those of you who are listening in, if you can't see it, just type something into the chat. Otherwise, Dan, just proceed forward. You're on slide 12.
But am I on your version, or did you give me control?
I have control. I'll flip the slides for you, Dan.
Okay. Thank you. One of the things that Keith has alluded to in several different points is the fact that there is a relationship between business operating strategy and digital strategy that ultimately turns into business transformation or digital transformation. The context for both of those, the things that give those things meaning, is the corporate strategy. And what we'll be talking about is how the corporate strategy really needs to interact with the business operating strategy. and then how the corporate and the business operating strategy drives and defines digital strategy. The different types of strategy, really, in the model here, we can see that they're flowing together. What that really means is that they have to be in alignment. Now, the place that you start to align, and we'll talk about that in a lot more detail, is at the capability level. They need to work together to really define how that support is going to be applied. In a lot of cases today, people look at digital transformation and business transformation as separate and independent activities. And one of the big differences that we're proposing here is that they're really not separate activities. That if you look at your corporate strategy and you look at where it is today and where you're going in the future, and then you start to say, what's the difference between the two? That sets up a framework that will then help you define the types of automation services that you're going to need, aligning that with the business transformation evolution. You can now put the two of them together and look at investment, what has to happen and where. The end point of that also then starts to drive the type of technologies that you're going to need based on the capabilities that are defined in the future at some point in time. What this all does is it ties things together and gives you justification for, first of all, digital transformation. And then secondly, the types of technologies that you want to acquire, that you want to move to within the context of that digital transformation. Slide, please. Okay. Now, so, what's changing and how does it align to strategy? Because as I mentioned, when you run the current in the, essentially you analyze the current within the context of the future, you can start to look at a very detailed level, the types of things that are going to need to be supported. We call those capabilities. And I know there's been a lot of talk in a lot of different circles. So what is a capability? Well, as we're defining it, a capability is just the ability to do something. So what changes here, first of all, is your strategic vision from the current to the future. That can be a very different vision. You may move into new markets. You may introduce new products. You may look at an acquisition of different companies. You may look at mergers. There are a lot of different things that come into your strategic vision. To accomplish that strategic vision, though, you have to have certain capabilities because the capability defines what you have to do. So in that new business operation, what are the different things, the capabilities that you need? What do you have to do? Looking at the current operation, you can do the same thing, and you'll find that your processes need to align to those capabilities. So as we look at the future, we can look at the capabilities that will carry forward, the capabilities that don't exist today that we'll need in the future. And some of the capabilities will obviously fall in the middle and need to be modified. What that does, though, is it gives you a clear roadmap of what has to be done and moving from today to what that future vision is. That'll define a new operating model and a new revenue model, because the revenue model will change along with the business model by new products, by new locations, new sales models, a variety of different things. And a good example of that was, in the past, we had a store-based model. Now, a physical store-based model. Now we have a model where the majority of the transactions that are taking place are over the internet. So that changed the business model, it changed the revenue model, it changed the goals. It changed how we look at digitalization and digital capabilities. As we moved into COVID, it once again changed our digital capability requirements because the business model itself has changed and the goals have changed. So this is a very fluid, a very dynamic type of an approach to it that supports the way the world really works. Okay, next slide, please, Keith. Now, we've talked about aligning business and digital capabilities. But what does that really mean to us? Well, the first thing is that if I'm going to do something in my business operation, I have to say what kind of systems do I need and what kind of interactive capabilities do I need. The alignment then to digital transformation happens from the standpoint of disconnects and capabilities that are needed. A disconnect really is something that you believe works a certain way, and in the business it works one way, but then the IT support is different. Maybe it's inadequate, maybe there is no IT support. We need to look at it, we need to define that, we need to look at that within, again, the context of capabilities. And one of the things that history has shown us that is, if there is a misalignment between IT and the business operation, which, you know, we hear all the time, the system doesn't support us, the data is no good, the analytics don't really tell us what we need to know. Those are all things that we'll call misalignments. And when we start to look at expectations, especially moving into the future, all those misalignments are expected to be corrected. To correct them, we first of all have to identify what they are. We have to identify what that misalignment really is failing to do. And then we have to look at the expectations of management, of the users, and look at how we now can put different things in place to meet those expectations. Okay. And we have the next slide, please, Keith. Now, obviously, you know, which comes first in this, the chicken or the egg? And, you know, while this is an impossible question, in the business or digital transformation area, we can answer it. And the answer is, first of all, you have to have a company strategy. That company strategy then gives you a framework, not only of the future, but of the steps that need to be taken along the road to delivering whatever that strategy and that business operation is in the future. As we mentioned before, business transformation then would define the type of support that's needed. Now, this is different than a lot of people have looked at in the past, because as we start to look at defining the support that's needed, we also have to consider optimization. We have to consider a lot of different things that as the business has evolved, it really hasn't needed to consider in the past. One of the key things when we start to look at business transformation and how it's supported with digital transformation is flexibility. And as we start to look at flexibility, we recognize that it needs to be built in to all parts of the operation. So we can see how everything then would support our future framework in defining the vision, which ties back into the strategy, which then ties back into the senior executive committee. One of the reasons, the big reasons for failure is that it fails, whatever's delivered fails to meet expectations. It fails to meet expectations largely because those expectations, A, aren't defined, and B, aren't changed as we move through the project and we learn more and recognize different things than we knew to start with. This gives us a framework where we can move through both business transformation and digital transformation because they're all aligned. And we know what's going to happen from the business side, what the IT side has to do in order to make that happen. And what has to happen from the business side has to align with expectations. Those expectations in turn align with business strategy. I would submit that either business transformation strategies or digital transformation strategies are kind of ill-defined if they don't relate to how are they going to help the company get to a certain objective. And that certain objective is the business operating model of the future. To focus on today, as Keith was mentioning, to focus on the day today is fine, but we know from history that tomorrow, whatever we're doing today is going to need to change. And that's where the flexibility comes in, and that's how this all ties together. Now, from a business transformation perspective, one of the things that we have to move forward to, and this makes this a very collaborative and very interactive experience, is optimization in the workflow and in the support. And the reason it has to be collaborative is that it's going to change and evolve as you move from today into whatever your future model is going to be and how that's defined. Today, largely that evolution is not controlled. IT evolves separately from the business operation, and oftentimes the business operation evolves independently from the strategy. When you tie them all together, you get a totally different experience and a totally different model. And you're able to look at how you can optimize the work and the activity within the company itself, and how you can increase the value of the transformation. And increasing that value helps you to not only justify, but define the benefits of a digital transformation model, which is a problem today. Getting rid of legacy applications, legacy technology is great, but what's the context and what's it really going to do for you? And you can't really answer that question when you're just focused on systems and support today. When you add in where you're going and the types of support, you get a very different return on investment model. Okay. Can we go to the next slide, Keith? Okay. So which are the best investments? Well, when we look at modernization, which is really what digital transformation is all about, we now, by tying it and aligning it to business transformation, we have a context. We have kind of like a wireframe of what has to be done. The things that are listed on the left are not listed in an order of importance or an order of you have to do this first. But we need to replace legacy applications. We need to improve data handling. Improve how flexible we are and how quickly we're able to respond. The modern technologies, BPMS, RPA, different modern technologies are very good at delivering that flexibility. But to deliver that flexibility, the teams have to have experience and understand what they're doing. And I'll depart with a little story for right now before I come back to this. I was in charge of a very large project where we brought in a BPMS tool. And we were sold on the fact that the BPMS tool would make everything fast and easy and whatever. Well, it didn't. And the reason it didn't was because we sent everybody through the training courses for the vendor. And then we even had a couple of vendor people mentoring our team. They were doing things, and we'll say an inefficient way more often than not, and having to rework and redo things, and it became a mess. It wasn't a problem with the tool. It was a problem with training. It was a problem with experience. Now, our developers were all experienced in old technologies, but the old technologies are very different than the new ones. So when we start to look at how we're going to do things and how we're going to improve things, how we're going to modernize and redesign operations, it's not enough to bring in tools. And it's not enough to train people in, we'll say, vendor training courses. They need to run through a couple of projects, and they need to stub their toes and understand what works and the best way to make that thing work. So that's when we start to look at investments. People typically underestimate training and have problems because of that. But anything that's strategic will seldom provide an immediate high value benefit, no matter what it is. And the reason is, unlike something that is meant to as an improvement, which has a short duration and kind of an immediate payback, strategic changes are things that give you capabilities in the future and allow you to compete better in the future. The immediate benefits can start to come from the individual steps along the journey to transformation. And that'll start to cut down the benefit realization cycle. It'll also allow you to align cost with benefit more closely and start to control your deliverables in a very different way. So you need to, from a transformation perspective, initially start to invest in those components of the future operation that will not only be a foundation for further transformation, but also give you some payback and the pieces of that future operation that are going to be released. Okay. Keith, next slide, please. Now we start to look at internal competition. Internal competition is, it's not people trying to oversell one another or say my product is better than your product. It's an operational competition. Every operation, even those that are often transformed, have built-in conflicts in the work and how those rules that govern the work are done. Now, here's something that is often overlooked as we go through this, and that's the identification, definition, and normalization of business rules. Modern technology works on rules. Essentially, it executes one rule after the next, and that's really how they work. The problem is, in business operations today, first of all, you can't find all of the rules. Some of them are hidden in systems. Some of them are just hidden in folklore, which today is causing inconsistencies. In the future, those rules omissions and those rule definition differences are going to cause your system's applications to fail. What I typically tell clients is anything that's delivered will take a year to shake itself out because you're not going to have identified all of the rules. So as you hit different errors, you now identify where you missed some rules. And over the course of about a year, you'll hit all those situations and you'll now have identified all the rules. The good news is that with the modern technologies, it's really easy and fast once you understand how they work. It's really easy and fast to change and add those rules in. So it's an evolution as it comes in, and it's not based on a technology need. It's based on the reality on the ground in your business operation. And one of the reasons these things, these rules, and even the operations have been duplicated, are in conflict, is the old silo approach to management, where work has been divided amongst different organization entities. And those organization entities typically don't trust one another. So they often build in different checks and balances that they don't really need. I was in one organization where the downstream group didn't trust the upstream group. So it essentially re-adjudicated all of the claims that were given to it and then refiled them. So we had a total duplication because manager A didn't trust manager B, and manager A's bonus was aligned with their error rate and things like that. So when we went in there, we put the rules in place to make sure that that didn't happen. And we were able actually to get rid of one of the groups. So you have to look at eliminating those competing needs because they also start to give you competition for budget, they give you competition for resources, and they give you competition for performance measurement. Okay, Keith, can we go to the next slide, please? Now, as I mentioned before, and in my opinion, the key reason that you want to transform the business and IT is to gain extreme nimbleness, extreme flexibility. And the reason that's important is no matter what you do today will need to be changed tomorrow. And that's with the speed of change of technology, the speed of market change, as new technology is introduced into the general population, people figure out how to use it in different ways. And as they start to find different ways to use that, the demand for the way that you interact with them starts to change. So if you want to remain relevant to your customers, you have to have the nimbleness and capability to change that is more extreme than anyone has experienced in the past. And as we move more and more into a global marketplace, that's becoming more and more important. Another thing that is critically important that drives this need for extreme flexibility is government regulations. Disruption response, opportunities for response in different market opportunities. But one of the things that is very dynamic, especially when you're an international company, is national regulations. If you're say you're doing business in 20 companies, you have to deal with regulations and regulatory changes in all of those 20 companies. And you have to look at how they conflict with one another, and you have to be able to support them by certain dates, which in itself now drives you to a need for extreme flexibility. And, you're not going to get, because of the way flexibility really has to be implemented in the organization, you're really not going to get that capability unless you get it through transformation, where you're looking at a broad enough part of the operation where transformation, where you can really affect the operation, and that's really transformation. Okay, we've pretty much touched on this. The one thing I'd like to talk about here is that the real opportunity of digital transformation, just like business transformation, but from a technical perspective, is modernization of the operation. It's the elimination of legacy technology over time and the implementation of new technologies, new systems, new infrastructure. And what we have now kind of evolved as a past CIO. One of the things we have kind of evolved over the last 50 years, 70 years, we now need to get rid of the kludge that we've created with new systems and interfaces and emulation and all that type of thing. And now really, in a lot of ways from a technology perspective, start over. Why did we have problems? Well, because a lot of things didn't work. So we had investment cautions. And we wound up with, because of those investment cautions, we wound up dragging around legacy systems that should have been replaced a long, long time ago. Keith, can we move to the next slide, please? So why is what we're talking about today, and I'm really looking forward to a conversation which we'll get to in just a moment with everybody in an open discussion. One of the key drivers to failure is that transformations, whether it's business or digital or the combination that we're espousing, fails to deliver expectations. When you start with strategy and you start tying everything together, you can control expectations and you can control the delivery of that, which reduces failure. This also ties delivery not only to a long-term investment target, but along the way, as you're evolving towards your future state environment, you can now divide that up easily into phases, and each of those phases will have a delivery and a benefit and an investment. And you can show a different type of value because it's not, well, wait, we'll get there someday. You're delivering things on an ongoing basis and you're building trust. Through that, you have your justification for change. And you also have the ability, by aligning your technology acquisition to the timing of your business change, to justify that technology acquisition. The strategy says I have to do X, and the business, that means here's the implication of that in the business. And then if I want to do that, if I want to do X, here's the technology I'm going to need. So it gives you a justification for the technology. It gives you time to gain experience with that technology. And it also then lets you tie everything together to deliver value on an ongoing basis. And the final thing here that I'd like to point out is it gives you a realistic joint business and digital transformation plan. It ties everything together so that you're not doing things independently of one another and find that you have technology that you don't need, or you have business operations that can't be supported by the technologies. And at this point, I'll turn it to Keith. And Keith will go through some key takeaways from our discussion.
Okay, thanks, Dan. We stepped back and thought, well, it might be interesting to have a couple 4 specific actions that you guys can consider taking based on your own experience and organization. And the first is, as Dan really talked, really reviewing the current strategy, the vision, and what are the business capabilities and the technology capabilities that are required to achieve that strategy. Benefit obviously is improving the understanding of what's required for the operating model and what are both the business and the digital capabilities and their constraints required to achieve the operating model that you're working towards. The next, with again, also regarding the vision and strategy, is really defining both the business and the technology capabilities to support the ongoing operation. This provides a wireframe, in effect, of what the new business and digital transformation design needs to be. A third one is really thinking about, again, what are the future state capabilities and aligning them to what the investments need to be made in the organization. And then finally, a little bit more about the business capabilities is understanding when we have a capability today, how does that need to change and what investments need to be done? Is the organization ready for the degree of change that you're espousing or trying to achieve? And if not, what do we need to do to really help the organization make that transition? So again, these are some thoughts from our team as we thought about giving you guys some really practical ideas around thinking about both digital and business transformation. Something we'd like to share with everybody is that we've just started a new professional community, which we call Sharing. The intention is that as professionals, we're out there working in the trenches, solving problems, addressing gaps between what leadership wants and what we're able to deliver and the timing and so forth. And so this is meant to be a forum for us to share our experiences and then really have the opportunity to vet some of those issues with our colleagues in a very kind of safe and informative fashion. So we welcome you to explore what that looks like on our site. Again, we welcome you to take a look at our website, which offers not just courses in business transformation, but also in business architecture, process architecture, and leadership a variety of change curriculums that are, again, specifically targeted to those of us who are working with members of the leadership, members of the organization to design, plan, and implement change. We welcome you to visit the site and download a couple of new papers that we've published. One is on disruption and how to really better prepare for disruption. And when we think about disruption, this is beyond the typical change conversation that we have in organizations. We all know that change continues to occur, but now we're recognizing that very large scale disruptive events occur. COVID-19, the recent pandemic being just one example of really large disruptions which cause organizations to suddenly react and don't necessarily have the contingency plans, let alone the organizational capabilities to think about and address disruption in the right manner. We run monthly webinars. We have another one in the new year focused on this discussion of disruption. So we welcome everybody to join us for that. So with the remaining time, we want to open up the line. So Trevor, if you could just open up the line, and you can either text a question in the chat or just toss out your thoughts about what we talked about. Does it make sense? Does it not make sense? What is your current experience with some of the challenges you're facing with? So for those of you on the line, you're welcome to join us. Not everybody jump out there on top of each other here.
Trevor, I saw a couple questions start to come in. Could we address some questions, please?
I'm not receiving any questions. Yep. So if you see some, read them out.
I saw one, for some reason I saw it come across. Someone asked if they were going to get a copy of the slides, or we were going to send out a copy of the slides. We sent out a full copy of the slides about an hour prior to the presentation. If you didn't receive one, please contact us, because that means there's something wrong with the email address that we have for you. And we certainly need to get that fixed so we can send you this and other materials that you may want in the future.
So a question I'll pose to those on the line, in your organizations or your experience, do you see conflict or tension between the notion of business and digital transformation? And what does that look like from your experience perspective?
Well, given the response, could the people on the line let us know, are you involved, or is your company involved in digital transformation, or is it planning to be involved in digital transformation in the near future? You can either talk to us or let us know through the chat capability. Okay, once again.
Hi, this is Ron Lamb. Do you hear me?
Oh, yes.
Go ahead, Ron.
Hi, how are you doing? So I have a question about digital transformation, and that is, and maybe people can respond to this who are also online, is whether they experience it as a grand program or whether it's more a flywheel effect, where the understanding is it's a digital transformation, but there are so many varied opportunities to move a little bit towards what will ultimately look like transformation, rather than the grand digital transformation program. Does that make sense in terms of everybody's got an opportunity within their team or their functional area to look at what is going to contribute to something that ultimately is digital transformation?
Does anybody want to join in the conversation? Well, Ron, I can give you a perspective based on experience in history. And what that is, when there isn't an overriding strategy and there isn't an overriding plan and design as to what the end is going to look like, everybody making little changes on their own, pulling in new technologies, this group doing something different than another group, you're going to wind up with the same hodgepodge situation that you have today, which will be ineffective and inefficient and be much more costly than it needs to be and much more time consuming from a change perspective than it needs to be. I would urge you to try to take a look at this from a more holistic perspective. And, from an acquisition standpoint, maybe what your group wants to do is similar or will need similar technology to what some other group wants to do. And you guys can share the costs and share the budgets and that type of thing. As more than one group wants to do something, it becomes more important that it be done. It's just kind of an observation.
So I'll add to that. It's an interesting point. For me, I kind of use the metaphor of a big bang versus kind of incrementalism along the way. And I found that working in organizations that say, all right, we're going to do a big bang, we're going to do a big transformation from a digital perspective, and that'll happen a year from now. Well, a couple of things happen inside the business. One is we all wait for something to happen, and we have huge expectations that we're going to see this miraculous system arrive, hopefully on time, on budget, and providing the capabilities we need. But in the meantime, we still need things to be fixed in the organization. So to Dan's point, we may create more workarounds. We may acquire technology on our own, meaning the business acquires its own technology to implement as a stopgap. And now you've got even a more chaotic environment as we've been waiting for the big bang to occur. And then guess what? The big bang doesn't happen on time, or it happens in a feature light way and creates disappointment as we now have an even more cobbled together environment that we need to move from. So it becomes an interesting implementation strategy. Is, do you go for a big bang and suddenly we have this new capability suddenly available, or can you build it out in sprints or in phases so that you start to deploy the technology and start to see sooner impact? Now, I'm certainly respectful of the fact that sometimes you can't implement an ERP system piecemeal, for example. It needs to be done in more of a holistic way. But the point being is, what opportunities do you have so you can see incremental benefits in the business sooner rather than waiting for a large change to be pushed into the system?
I think that's largely what I was actually trying to get at, which is life goes on, and not everyone has the opportunity to pull the trigger on something called, we're doing a digital transformation that is an integrated program. And so as people who, obviously people are on this call, have got passion or energy around this, there's a continuous decision to say, okay, do I wait until somebody says we now have the grand transformation, or is there something, assuming there is a vision? So I completely grant the idea from Dan that if you do it hodgepodge, yeah, I'm not sure exactly what the value is other than solving your local issue. But assuming that you can get at least a vision that people can drive towards, that question about life goes on, I have new decisions virtually every day to make, how am I going to act or react? And I can make moves that help us move towards that vision. So perhaps maybe the better question is there such a thing or an opportunity to have a proxy for what might seem to be a missing impetus for a digital transformation, and then a substitute in the short term, some sort of vision that helps people who have to make daily decisions.
Well, if I can jump back in, from an approach standpoint, what I recommend that you consider is an overall, from a technology side, here's the technology environment that we're going to build towards. Now, that means everybody in the company has a framework that they're going to move toward. And as they start to do it, the projects are done individually. So it's kind of a hybrid between, from a big bang standpoint, you put together the overall design. So here's how this is going to work, how it's all going to fit together.
I think what you're saying there is that it is possible, but what I got out of what you just said as well is, unless that vision or that overall, call it an architecture perhaps, is visible and understood and known by, you know, a broad enough group, then that falls flat. So it really goes to also the issue of how would you go about communicating that vision or that architecture that people can move towards?
Well, one of the things that I've done working with CIOs in the past is, you know, the CIO will recognize that something has to be done, that the way that things are going right now is just not going to take the company where it wants to go. And that's pretty much true everywhere. The question is, what do you do about it, and how do you cast it in a way that it is justified and that the benefit is clearly there? And that's what we're talking about when you start to meld these strategies. I would look at working with senior management in IT, first of all, and helping them look at the business strategy and say, okay, here's what we're going to need, when we're going to need it from a business strategy standpoint, and then put together an overall design of, you know, we're going to need to move into, you know, RPA technologies. We're going to, because of whatever, it's going to help us deliver X, which will give us Y benefit. And if you do that with all of the technologies that line up to give you the enabled capabilities at the at some point in the future, at the target environment, at that point you can start to say, okay, here's what that environment's going to look like and how it's all going to hang together. And if you're going to, at that point, you can now say, if you're going to get into BPM technology, you're going to go with, here's the company's BPM tool, or here's the RPA tool, or here's the AI tool, whatever. And here are the kind of the standards as to how it all fits together. If you don't do that, everybody does their own thing and nothing fits together, which is the way that it evolved in the past. So what this does is it, from working backward from strategy to capabilities to, okay, here's what we need in order to deliver that, everything is tied together in a nice little package that does not stop anyone from doing what they need to do. It just gives them a framework to do it in, and it identifies the technologies they need to use if they're going to do it.
So thanks for that, Dan. Any other thoughts or comments as we start to wrap up our webinar this afternoon?
And by the way, if you'd like to contact me, I'd be happy to continue the discussion with you. Was it Ron?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, you know, just because we've run out of time now doesn't mean we have to I can give you my phone number now and give me a call. And my direct number is 630-290-4858. And can continue this and, you know, hopefully help you put together an approach that'll work in your situation.
Great. Thank you so much.
Okay.
All right, everybody. Well, we appreciate your participation this afternoon and certainly invite you to continue to engage with us in any fashion that works for you. Meaning, check out our site, join us for future discussions, be part of the sharing community, and check out our courses. We have several free courses that introduce some of the concepts that we've talked about, and certainly would invite you to take advantage of that. With that, on behalf of Dan and myself, we'd like to thank you and have a safe rest of the day and a great holiday coming up. Be well. Be safe.
One thing I'd like to add before we all hang up is, as a result of any webinar that you may attend, if we don't get to a question, if you haven't thought of a question, once you think of something that you would like us to address with you, drop us a note and we'll be happy to get in touch and see how we can possibly help you. With that, again, as Keith mentioned, have a great holiday season and hope to continue to interact with you going forward.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Be safe.
Bye.